The cabin air hummed with the steady vibration of engines at cruising altitude. Inside seat 18C, the man sat motionless, his posture rigid against the headrest. He caught the attention of a passing flight attendant with a subtle nod. When she arrived, he ordered a bourbon and soda, his voice low and devoid of tremor. She returned moments later, placing the drink on his tray table. As she turned to leave, he slid a folded piece of paper across the plastic surface. She picked it up, barely glancing at the handwriting, and tucked it into her pocket with a practiced, dismissive smile. She assumed it was another lonely passenger looking for a connection, another phone number to be discarded once the plane touched down. She walked toward the galley, the note sitting heavy in her pocket, completely unaware that the trajectory of the flight had already shifted. The man watched her retreat, his fingers drumming once, twice against the armrest. He took a slow sip of the bourbon, his eyes scanning the cabin. Everything was exactly where he needed it to be. The flight attendant reached the galley and began to reset her cart. She reached into her pocket to discard the note, but stopped when she felt the texture of the paper. She hesitated, glancing back toward the main cabin. The man was no longer looking out the window. He was watching her. She walked back, intending to return the paper, but he leaned forward, his face hardening into a mask of absolute focus. He waited until she was within arm's reach before speaking. His voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient drone of the engines. "Miss, you had better look at that note. I have a bomb." The air in the aisle seemed to vanish. Her smile evaporated, replaced by a sudden, rigid stillness. He reached down to his briefcase, snapping the latches with a metallic click that echoed in the quiet row. He opened the lid just enough for her to see. Inside, a tangle of wires snaked around thick red cylinders. The device looked heavy, deliberate, and entirely real. She took an involuntary step back, her hand trembling as it hovered near the armrest. The man did not blink. He closed the briefcase, the latch snapping shut with finality. The flight was no longer a routine transit. It was his. The attendant moved toward the cockpit, her movements stiff and mechanical. She entered, the door latching behind her with a soft thud. Inside the cabin, the man remained in seat 18C, his briefcase resting squarely on his knees. He did not move to threaten the other passengers. He simply waited. Within minutes, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, directed to the ground. The man stood, walked to the cockpit entrance, and relayed his terms clearly. $200,000. 4 parachutes. The currency had to be in $20 bills, bundled and ready. The cabin grew silent as the reality of the situation filtered through to the passengers. Outside, the plane entered a wide, slow orbit, circling the dark expanse of the sky. Below, the airline scrambled. Executives and federal agents began the frantic process of gathering the cash, their voices frantic over open radio lines. The man checked his watch, his eyes moving from the altimeter to the horizon. He was not rushing. He was orchestrating. Every minute that passed in the holding pattern increased the pressure on the ground teams. He stood in the aisle, a silent sentry, watching the cabin with a steady, unyielding gaze as the fuel burned and the deadline drew closer. The heavy landing gear slammed onto the Seattle runway, the screech of rubber cutting through the night. The plane taxied to a remote corner of the tarmac, far from the terminal lights. The man remained near the stairs, his briefcase held tight. Outside, ground crews moved like shadows, delivering the bags of money and the requested parachutes through the service hatch. He inspected the delivery with clinical detachment, verifying the bundles and the gear before signaling the pilot. The cabin door opened. The 36 passengers were ordered to exit first. They moved in a frantic line, stumbling onto the stairs and toward the waiting vehicles. Once the last passenger vanished into the dark, the man closed the cabin door. The silence that followed was heavy. He was alone with the crew now. The fuel trucks finished their work, pulling away into the distance. He stood at the center of the aisle, checking the weight of the money bag against his own resolve. The engines began to whine as the pilot prepared for departure. He had what he wanted, and the target was set. He walked back to his seat, waiting for the plane to lift into the void once more. The engines roared to life, pushing the plane away from the safety of the runway. Within minutes, the lights of Seattle faded into a distant, blurred glow. The man moved to the cockpit, his presence a constant. Heavy weight behind the pilots. He issued his final orders: fly south toward Mexico, maintain a low altitude, and keep the landing gear deployed. The pilot fought the controls as the plane dipped into the thick, dark air. Outside, the weather turned volatile. Freezing rain hammered against the fuselage, creating a rhythmic, metallic drumming that filled the cabin. Turbulence gripped the aircraft, throwing it into sudden, violent drops. The cabin lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the aisle. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every instrument was under intense scrutiny as the plane descended into the heart of the storm. The man watched the horizon, his hands steady as he checked the rigging of the money bag. He walked back to the rear of the cabin, the floor tilting beneath his feet. The air was thin and biting. He reached for the handle of the aft stairs, his movements precise and deliberate. He was ready. The wind howled against the door as he prepared to step into the abyss. The handle turned with a sharp metallic grind. He pulled, but the air pressure pinned the door against the frame like a slab of solid iron. He braced his boots against the bulkhead, gritted his teeth, and hauled back with every ounce of his strength. The seal broke, the door swung wide, and the cabin was instantly shredded by a violent, freezing gale. Rain whipped into the interior, stinging like needles. He did not hesitate. He lunged for the straps of the money bag, pulling the weight tight against his chest. He checked the buckles, feeling the heavy shift of the currency against his ribs. He moved toward the threshold, the floor vibrating beneath his feet as the aircraft bucked in the turbulent air. The roar of the wind was deafening, a constant, high-pitched scream that swallowed all other sound. He reached the edge of the stairs, looking down into a swirling, black abyss. The freezing rain blinded him. He took one final breath, the air burning his lungs, and leaned forward. Gravity grabbed him. He kicked off the metal step, his body instantly consumed by the dark. The cabin remained, echoing with the howl of the storm, but he was gone. The aircraft descended through the cloud layer, banking sharply toward the runway. It hit the tarmac hard. The nose wheel slammed down, and the entire fuselage shuddered. Behind the plane, the aft stairs scraped against the concrete, throwing a spray of sparks into the night air. The grinding sound of metal on runway echoed across the field as the pilot braked to a halt. Silence followed. The engines spooled down, their whine fading into a low, hollow hum. Seconds passed. No one moved. The control tower called out, but the radio remained dead. Police cruisers swarmed the perimeter, their lights cutting through the heavy rain. Officers approached the rear of the plane with weapons drawn, expecting a trap. They pulled the door wide. The cabin was freezing, filled with the smell of stale air and ozone. Rows of seats stood empty, illuminated by the harsh, flickering emergency lights. The man was nowhere to be found. A search of the aisles revealed nothing but a single black clip-on tie resting on a seat and 8 cigarette butts scattered in the tray of 18C. The cabin was a graveyard of silence. He had vanished, leaving the machine behind as his only witness. By dawn, the FBI had mobilized the largest manhunt in aviation history. Agents fanned out across the Washington wilderness, turning the forest floor into a grid of systematic searches. They brought in dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of personnel to scour every acre of the dense, rain-soaked terrain. Every lead was pursued with clinical precision. They interviewed airport staff, passengers, and anyone who had been within 50 miles of the flight path. For weeks, the woods echoed with the sound of boots on wet earth and the shouts of men pushing through tangled undergrowth. They searched caves, ravines, and riverbanks. They sifted through piles of mud and rotted leaves, looking for a discarded bag or a scrap of evidence. They found nothing. No footprints, no discarded gear, no sign that anyone had survived the jump. The reports piled up on desks, growing heavy with dead ends and unanswered questions. As the weeks turned into months, the intensity of the effort slowly drained away. The wilderness seemed to have swallowed him whole. The trail did not just go cold, it simply ceased to exist. Investigators were left standing in the rain, looking at empty maps, and wondering how a man could step out of the sky and leave behind absolutely no trace. 9 years crawled by. The file gathered dust in a restricted archive, marked as an unsolvable anomaly. Then, the river shifted. In 1980, a young boy playing along the banks of the Columbia River began digging in the sediment. He hit something solid. He pulled a bundle of rotted, waterlogged paper from the sand. It was a mass of decaying $20 bills, fused together by years of silt and moisture. He brought the bundle to the authorities. Experts treated the package like a crime scene, carefully separating the fragile, moldy currency. They ran the serial numbers against the original list from 1,971. Every digit matched. The money had survived, buried in the mud, waiting in the dark for nearly a decade. For a moment, the investigation surged back to life. Agents swarmed the riverbank, sifting through tons of sand and debris, searching for more. They found nothing else. No other bundles, no gear, no remains. The discovery proved the man had hit the ground with the cash, but it offered no path to follow. It was a breadcrumb left in the current, leading nowhere. The river had kept the secret, and the trail vanished back into the sand as quickly as it had appeared. 50 years have passed since that flight path was etched into history. The archives remain locked, the files yellowed and brittle. Countless suspects have been scrutinized, vetted, and eventually dismissed as the evidence refuses to align. Some investigators maintain the physical impossibility of the jump, pointing to the lethal cold and the lack of gear as proof of a quiet end in the mountains. Others argue that the precision of the planning suggests a veteran, a man capable of vanishing into a new existence without leaving a single footprint. The debate continues in classrooms and police stations, a cycle of logic that never quite reaches a conclusion. We are left only with the silence of the wilderness and the cold weight of the unknown. Was he a mastermind who orchestrated his own disappearance? Or did he become a ghost in the high trees? The seat in the cabin remains empty, a permanent vacancy on a flight that never truly landed for the law. The truth stays suspended in the clouds, beyond reach, forever shielded by the passage of time. The mystery is not that he vanished, but that he left behind a void that no amount of searching could ever fill. He remains exactly where he chose to be, beyond the reach of history.